Hello everyone. My name is Anna. We haven't met. I was working this summer with Drew, Thomas, and Ryan. I was working with the Python side of things. So this is the work that I did this summer. Half of it I spent working with Project Pythia, and then the second half I worked with MedPy. So I'll just go ahead and tell you about like the all the little projects that I worked on. First, if you didn't know, Project Pythia is a Python-centered educational and training resource for the geoscience community. And I first started working with this project with Pythia Foundations, with like the set of tutorials that get you started on how to use Jupyter notebooks, how to use Python in general, and then GitHub. That was the important part for me because I didn't really have any experience using GitHub. So I started going through the tutorials for myself, trying to learn. And then while I was there, I started making small contributions of things that I thought would be nice for them to have, or very small mistakes like typos that I found. So that was how I got started. And then after that, I participated in the Project Pythia Hackathon. I was working with the Radiative Feedback Cookbook team. And while, if I'm being honest, most of the science behind the cookbook went over my head, it was really nice to learn about like the inner workings of the cookbooks, like how do you start one from scratch, how do you write it, make it look good, and then how do you get it published. So if you want to see my the cookbook I work on, there's like QR code right there. After that, I authored a new cookbook. This was where Thomas helped me with. This is a machine learning cookbook that is an introduction to how to run a machine learning algorithm, and it complements the already existing NSF Unidata cyber training project. So this cookbook presents a very basic regression problem with linear regression and decision tree regression models. And it introduces the learner to the scikit-learn API by showing them how to do exploratory data analysis, how to split your data set, how do you scale it, and then how do you train and evaluate your model. Here are some pictures of how the cookbook looks like, and also a QR code if you want to look at it. So that was the first half. And then for my MedPy work, first I worked on this new function that it's called, so far it's called train test split. And the goal of this function is that you give it a data set, and then it's going to split it into training and testing data sets. And scikit-learn already has a function that does this, but we implemented some new things. So for example, first, this function uses the time variable to split the data. And this can be changed, but the default is splitting on the time variable, which is very useful when we deal with time series in climate and weather data, because we always want the training data to be in like the oldest one, and then we test on the most recent one. So we don't want that, we don't want like our data to just be like random or all mixed up. We just want to keep them separate. We also can create an optional validation data set. So instead of splitting the data set into parts, we can split it into 3. And the most important part about this function is that it handles XArray data sets. The scikit-learn doesn't, so this was specifically for XArray. Okay, and then changing gears a little bit again. MedPy has this function that is called parse WPC surface bulletin. And this is for parsing the Weather Prediction Center surface bulletins into a pandas data frame, because if you ever looked at the files, they're not very easy to understand. It's just words and a bunch of numbers. So this just lets us like visualize the data in the table, and then it's also easier to plot after that. And there was an issue with this function, like GitHub user noted that the bulletins were being parsed incorrectly for the southern hemisphere. So you can see in the plot, they all looked all messed up, like all around the same latitude. So I decided I wanted to go ahead and try to fix this. And so like my modifications did resolve the issue. You can see this is the after plotting after the modifications. And I also added new tests so that we can ensure that if any other modifications are made to the function, the southern hemisphere will be safe. While I was working with this issue, we decided that we noticed that it was not so easy to plot these surface weather maps. So we decided that it would be a good task for me to create a new class that would make this plotting much easier. And I think I already implemented. It's called surface analysis. And now the process can be done with only a few lines of code. This class has a lot of customizable traits like colors, label, font sizes, marker sizes, and other things. So here you can see this is the code that you need to get the map on the right. If you write exactly this is the map that you get. So you can see at the top, we just parse. You give the parse WP surface bulletin function your file. Then we can call plot surface analysis, and you give plot surface analysis your data. And then this last part is just like giving parameters for like getting the map the way you want it. But really, the plot surface analysis class, it's only these 4 lines, and that's all you need to do all this. These are the default settings, like the normal colors, and then the highs are just the H's and the L's, the lows. Like I said, it is customizable. So this is the same plot, changing the colors and the sizes and the labels. So you have a lot of freedom with the class. And again, a QR code if you want to see the complete plotting example of how to get these 2 plots. Okay, so in conclusion, at first I thought that my projects this summer were not really connected to each other. Like I was just doing a lot of different things. But then I realized like, well, both Project PT and MedPy doesn't matter like the things that I did within them, but both of them are open source projects. And so really my summer was like an experience learning a lot about that. And my takeaways were that first, these projects are very valuable to the scientific community, like from a educational and a research point of view. I was also very surprised to find that it's actually not so difficult to contribute to them. Like I didn't really have experience with software development or the GitHub workflow and all of these things. So it was a learning process, but overall it was way easier than I thought. And there are so many different ways that you can contribute. Like these, like I felt like all of the smaller things that I did throughout the summer show, like there was just not one way of doing this work. Like I could have focused on only one thing, but I really try to find different stuff that I could do. So yeah, these are my takeaways. And before I finished, Leo told me he was adding pictures, so I wanted to add pictures as well. Yeah, so these are the hikes. Me being very, very happy at the Celestial Seasonings tour, and then me diving into Emerald Lake and getting out immediately because it was extremely cold. So I went out immediately. That was it. And I added the snake we saw when we went hiking, Leo and I. Yeah. So yeah, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay, yeah, so that is it. Thank you so much to everyone that helped me with my work this summer, and also to the people that were not involved directly with my projects. It was really nice to meet you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Does anyone have questions for Anna? True. They let both of you fly the plane?
Oh, yes.
That's all.
Yeah, they had a bias towards Unidata interns. Don't know why.
Other questions? I can also ask a real question. So you said it was your last slide there. It was really cool to see sort of your takeaways for your experience this summer. what was the sort of strangest or maybe most difficult way that you contributed or new skill you learned this summer? Like what one was the toughest to break into or
Mhm. I think when I started diving into the MedPy code, that's where like I thought I was more out of my comfort zone, definitely. Because so the first thing that I did was like the issue, working on the issue. So it was like, okay, this person says a problem with this function. Where do I even find this function? And what does this function do? And then like everything is so interconnected. So it was like navigating the already existing MedPy code was a very new thing to me. And then with like the creating the new class, because I didn't mention that, but at first this was not gonna be a new class. It was just gonna be like new modifications to an already existing one. And then we decided that was not gonna work, so we should just start from scratch. But trying to understand the existing code is actually a little bit hard sometimes, confusing, but it worked out.
thanks.
Other questions? Let's thank Anna once again for her work this summer.